The live-action Detective Pikachu movie is already 5 years old. How did that happen? Time is going way too fast, man. I fully remember even making videos about the Detective Pikachu movie. It was still before the time of doing proper movie content like I do nowadays on the channel. But even still, wow. Time is unrelenting and somehow we still haven't got a sequel for this movie. And that's a real shame, because I think of all movies in the last 5 years that have made an impact on the future of animation, Detective Pikachu, I would argue, is probably in the top 5 movies to make a change in the industry. I mean, it might be hard to imagine now, considering we're swamped by video game adaptations, but back in the days of Detective Pikachu, back in 2019, if there were any video game adaptations, they were ass. And this movie really knew how to do it well. Sure, we've had plenty of Pokémon movies made by the actual Pokémon company, but to have a live-action rendition and photorealistic Pokémon with CGI that doesn't look terrible and a plotline that's actually good, add on to the fact that it's also being stitched along with Ryan Reynolds hot off the presses of Deadpool 1, and this movie was one of the first great video game adaptations. Yeah, you can like the Street Fighter live-action movie, but, you know. This is also the movie that brought into the limelight, for me at least, Justice Smith, who's been appearing in all sorts of other things since then. Clearly they had the cast locked down, as well as the original voice actor for Pikachu, and I think this movie really was the start of the era of good video game adaptations. It was only after Detective Pikachu that Sonic the Hedgehog made their attempt, and everything just rolled out from there. Pokémon walked so that Sonic could run, but let's be honest, Pokémon was running pretty well as well. I mean, the more I think about this movie, the more I remember how iconic it was in so many ways. Mewtwo involved, Bill Nye having to psychic connect to him, Ditto was a human the whole time, like it was a wild movie. Now I don't know if this was a movie that was just a lightning in a bottle piece of luck, because for me, and I've kind of been called out for this before, I mean you're right, I'm a little bit of a Pokemon hater. I'm to the point where I'm the kind of pseudo-toxic fan where I can like a series so much that I start to dislike it because I'm too invested, right? I don't go as far out as to, verbally threaten the creators on Twitter or something like that, but I'm so invested in the world of Pokemon that I really dislike modern Pokemon. The fact that the games keep coming out more and more buggy, less and less graphically interesting, and yet they're still making more and more profits than any of their rivals in the video game industry makes me think it's lazy and, it's cutting corners. I hate cutting corners. It's the exact same reason why I love Fallout so much, and I'm enjoyed the recent TV series on the side, whilst also I kind of boycott the Fallout games now, because Bethesda has, that complete PR disaster that was Fallout 76, and so many microtransactions. And it's the same case here, where I don't really trust Pokémon Company or Game Freak with the actual production of new games. The best thing they made recently was Pokémon Legends Arceus, and even then, look at the water. But this, whether this came from the prowess of Legendary Pictures, or if it was just Pokémon doing their thing well in another industry, could have been a fluke, because even within the Detective Pikachu series and franchise, the same kind of complaints I would have with modern Pokémon show up there. Detective Pikachu as a story came out first in the form of a video game and then became the movie. They then released a sequel game, Detective Pikachu 2, yeah? And the plotline of the game is the plotline of the movie. Which would be fine if, they came out at all the same time. There's been all sorts of DS and Wii adaptations of movies as they came out. There's a whole movie, video game category of subgenre I could talk about one day. But no, Detective Pikachu 2, Detective Pikachu Returns, is a game that came out in 2023. 4 years later in October, and they've just rehashed the movie into a terribly produced video game. Like, no wonder I lost all motivation and belief in the company that runs this series. And I mean, look at it. It's from like 2009, visually. And it's a real shame, because it's clear that whoever the hell was behind Detective Pikachu the movie really had something nailed. You had a likable protagonist character, you had this interesting mystery as much as it gets solved by the end, you have all of the great fan surface elements of all sorts of Pokemon to make an appearance, Charizard in the underground battle system and Mewtwo as the final big talking guy the whole way through. Visually, it's astonishing, and they have some really great, I wouldn't call them set pieces because it's mostly green screen, but really nice, moments. And it's such a shame because it seems like such a one-off. You know, all the days of movie trailer news of anything that would be talking about maybe this movie coming back have long been gone since the end of CinemaCon. And considering it's been 5 years and nothing else has been even heard about another movie, it's just not gonna be made. Thank you very much for making it halfway through to this video. As per usual, do check below to see if you are subscribed, and thank you again for making it halfway through. Let's get a little bit of speculation going down in the comments. If you were to have a sequel Detective Pikachu movie, where would you want the plotline to go? What is there to expand if they were to do it again? Different protagonist entirely, or somehow reeling it back? I'd love to know your thoughts. And so that I don't take up too much more of your time, let's get back to the rest of the anniversary for Detective Pikachu. Now, actually, as I've been saying all that, apparently there was news at one point that there was a Detective Pikachu 2 being made. But I mean, it's not looking good. More recent updates we've seen from this year are the fact that the main protagonist, Justice Smith, hasn't been alerted to anything from the studio or the agent, only by the media, who might just be going around their own circle of, you know, it happens. And of course, with the likes of the SAG-AFTRA strikes last year, that of course will delay production. It sounds like if this is a movie being made, it's very far away from even reaching production, and like, honestly, I kind of would almost argue that the steam is lost. Why it wasn't ever a plan to make a quick follow-up sequel during the height of video game adaptations after such a stellar success of the first movie, I have no idea. Just mismanagement, I would say, if you want to make this a franchise. The original movie came out with a budget of $150 million and then tripled that to $450 million. But I guess that's kind of a penny drop compared to the total bucket of Pokémon profits. They made other things like a stop-motion Netflix show, which was nice and wholesome. I enjoyed that over Christmas, I guess. But I just don't have faith in this upcoming sequel, and that's a real shame, because the actual core movie, talking specifically about this movie since it's the 5-year anniversary of the damn thing, this is a stellar movie. And if I forget about the fact that it's bittersweet that it might not continue after this point, it is still a brilliant piece of storytelling, told in a whole new format with some brilliant visuals, and it really made a mark on the industry. For the first time, video game movies weren't so clunky and weird and could have a genuine piece of lovely heart in it. It was able to bring in a great amount of fan service to all different sections of the fandom for those that just want to see their Pokemon, be it the cute bear or Charizard. It had its funny, weird meta moments with Ryan Reynolds being able to quip like he does around the texture or whatever the Mr. Mime is made out of. And yeah, with Ryan Reynolds running up front, it would of course get to a very broad Western audience, whilst highlighting actors that aren't necessarily known for their celebrity status just yet, which I think is a thing I'm really a big fan of. I like when someone is getting their platform more because of their talent than their name. But obviously, this was a nice 50-50 of both. It's kind of like what Ryan Reynolds is doing now with the Imaginary If movie. So that's great fun. And it would be great if this kind of franchise continued onwards. Perhaps since this did end up being the very start of a current era of video game movies, it can then be the next placating piece of the next era of video game movies that's hopefully even better. Since the visuals of this movie did almost seem to push the boundaries of CGI and photorealism. So maybe they're just cooking even more to make something just that extra next level greatness going forwards. They could expand in all sorts of plot lines. They could maybe not involve Justice Smith, but I would probably recommend that they do, covering a different mystery even with his father not a Pikachu anymore. I guess that's mainly the hurdle they've got to deal with. But on anything else, you know, it's just a nice, simple detective drama story. Involve all sorts of new Pokemon. There's been an entire new generation or two since the last movie. It's just an obvious answer, right? Live action Pokemon. I remember coming into this movie back in 2019 with really high hopes. I always am rooting for Pokemon to do well, and this was probably the biggest, maybe only W they've had in 5 years in my opinion. And I guess it perfectly, in my eyes at least, represents the Pokemon company as a whole, holding on to this brilliant franchise with so much depth and heart and potential, clearly being able to platforming it out to the biggest audience possible and leaving it just as that, and then removing themselves from the equation and not elaborating any further, not expanding in any future projects other than the crappy retelling DS looking thing 4 years later, and then just a bunch of less than average Pokemon games. And maybe that's a bit too harsh of me. You might be a great fan of Pokemon Violet and Sapphire, or whatever it's called, but like, just soulfully, they seem to be losing more and more of themselves and cutting corners the further they go. Perhaps then in that idea, maybe I like the fact that so far Detective Pikachu 2 is a little bit going through the bumpy rocks to never be made. Perhaps the sequel that's in my brain will always be better than the sequel they could actually make. Still, it can't be denied that Pokémon is a massive franchise and has a massive impact both in the gaming sphere and the movie video game as well. This really was the mark of the good times, and is the kind of movie that's still being talked about and referenced to even now, 5 years later. But I'd probably be best to stop right there before I anger any more die-hard Pokemon fans. Although I'd argue maybe you're not die-hard enough if you don't think that they're bad. Oh, I'm asking for trouble. Anyway, on that note, my name's been Daz. Thank you very much for making it to the very end of this video. If your opinions are different than mine, don't worry, they're still valid. I'm just a random guy that's grumbling right now. And I shall see you in a little bit.